Many people remember the building where Arasaka attacks Hanako and Takamura, potentially taking Takamura's life based on the player's actions. But for most players, they probably missed the much more interesting part of this building. You see, if you make your way upstairs in this seemingly run-down and nonchalant building, you eventually may stumble upon a partially opened door, that being room 301. When you first walk up, you notice a large blue light glow emitting from the room, and upon closer inspection and peering through the small crack in the door, you see what looks to be scribbles all over the walls. Unfortunately, there is no way to get into this room besides glitching through the door, but if you manage to do so, you are met with a haunting scene. The walls are littered with incoherent writings and shapes, and on the ground in the center of the room is a wrench with blood drenched around it. A large heap of file holders are held up in the corner of the room, and right on the center of the back wall in giant lettering is the phrase, "I am not me," with ink and potentially blood splattered everywhere. Something truly haunting has happened in this room, and some other users online have even reported hearing faint screams when near here, as well as the sounds of shattering glass. It's unclear if this was cut content from maybe a quest involving River or Cyber Psycho, or just an Easter egg from the devs. But either way, it's something beyond horrific that has happened in this room, and the building that contains it. Even more creepily is the significance of the number 301. You see, in many religious sects, the number 301 signifies the coming of a hellish angel, and further parallels to our own life can be drawn to organizations like Cicada 3301, which famously created well-known cryptography puzzles online for recruiting the smartest minds of our generation, only to disappear later without even giving people an idea of who they were. In terms of places in Cyberpunk 2077 that likely have more than meets the eye, Room 301 is certainly a place of such intrigue. One of the lesser-known series of missions in Cyberpunk is the Imagine gigs with a Buddhist Zen master. You originally stumble upon this questline if you were walking through the downtown Corpo Plaza area, and more specifically in the gardens. Here you will find a Zen master who asks you for some money to take you on a spiritual journey, as he has seen something in you. If you accept, you're transported into a foreign jungle, the likes of which you see nowhere else in the game for the most part, and this series continues with you meeting this mysterious monk in many locations across the world, hearing his words of wisdom, and having your mind be transported to unknown locations in nature, each time with the monk disappearing when you come back to your senses. It's a nice change of pace from the chaos of the rest of the game, but it's also harboring some very significant ramifications. A big part of the Cyberpunk main story is about the idea of human souls and what it means to be human, about whether copying ourselves into new bodies is really us or some new sort of monstrosity. And the ending of this questline specifically has some big answers for us. You see, upon completing the last meetup with this monk, he once again disappears into oblivion. But this time, Johnny is now next to us, sitting and looking into the distance. When confronted about his thoughts on the monk and his visions, Johnny questions what you are even talking about, and it quickly becomes clear that he has not been seeing what you have. The reason this is so significant is this is the only time in the entire game where you and Johnny had this sort of cognitive dissonance. Through every fight and every cutscene, Johnny is with you along the way, and it is only on the journeys with this monk that he seems to remember nothing. These journeys through your soul. Sitting next to Johnny after the monk disappears are two objects, a Buddhist altar trinket and a small shard. The shard tells the story of a man telling his grandson the story of the Tower of Babel, which, for those of you who don't know, is a story of humankind building a tower to try and reach heaven to avoid persecution, which resulted in God creating multiple languages to spite them. And in this shard, the man tells his grandson about the different religions and atheism, and how they all wanted to answer one burning question: do we have a soul or not? It is strongly implied through this entire quest that at least in Cyberpunk, we do have a soul, and that even a crazy terrorist man stuck in your head cannot take that away from you, and that maybe what these monks across the game world are studying is how to tap into our souls in a world that has become so soulless. This also would have implications for the ending and story beats of Cyberpunk, as it would confirm that those transferring their mind and body to new hosts and living on will still have lost what made them human, the soul. In fact, in one of Maximum Mike's radio discussions, he mentions that this monk master may just be Bartmoss wandering around in a new body, helping to offer guidance to lost souls, as we know others like Misty have seen this man from logs on her computer as well. The Perales storyline in Cyberpunk is a personal favorite for many in the community. You originally receive a call from Elizabeth, a woman asking for help, and upon meeting with her and her husband Jefferson in person, you come to the realization that they are in grave danger. And because Jefferson is running to be mayor, it's important that you get to the bottom of it quickly. You see, recently Jefferson awoke in the middle of the night and heard people inside his penthouse. He got his gun and tried to look around, but was immediately knocked out and doesn't remember anything else. Elizabeth thinks her husband is being paranoid and wants to help, but Jefferson is sure something is up. And as you snoop around their house, it is slowly unraveled that they have been monitored this entire time by a corporation they are now paying to protect them, SSRI, a lesser known and new protection firm, similar to Nightcorp. Hidden away in the middle of the Perales' home is a secret monitoring facility, where SSRI has been watching every move the Perales have been making. Someone is after them, and in an attempt to figure out who, you track down a van nearby that is sending a signal to the house. And when you get there, after clearing out a group of unknown bad guys, you hack into the van and discover that this unknown group is actually in the process of mind controlling the Perales. The reason they have been forgetting things and not feeling like themselves is because programs are being executed on their local chips to slowly transform them into puppets. You let Elizabeth know, and Jefferson, depending on what you choose to do, and the quest ends there, with a mysterious figure warning you over a call to stop looking into what you have discovered. But you see, at the end of the quest line, you also may notice a man off in the distance staring at you. A man the Cyberpunk community affectionately calls Mr. Blue Eyes. This man has been watching you throughout the entire quest line from different vantage points, and upon finding him at the end, he vanishes out of thin air. But we learn something about him from that short glimpse we get. Sitting on his finger is a ring that seems harmless at first. However, upon closer inspection, it becomes clear we have seen this ring before in many places. In fact, in some of the stories on this list before. Characters like Gary the Prophet, the monks praying to the magenta statue, and some higher level and shady characters we come across throughout the entire game. Furthermore, in one of the endings of the game, we actually get to meet Mr. Blue Eyes, and he tasks us with going to the Crystal Palace in space on a death mission, where the game abruptly ends as you float towards the structure. This man is clearly in the know about many things, and has friends in many high places and power we are not yet aware of. And the connections between the conspiracies of Cyberpunk and this blue-eyed man start to paint a picture that there may be something more going on in this universe. As stated before, Gary the Prophet and the magenta statues with the monks praying to them are all pointing to some sort of alien conspiracy on the net, or even Bartmoss, who is alluded to as having a golden ring of similar sorts to the blue-eyed man in one shard, claims aliens have taken over. Could this blue-eyed man, and all those with these rings of power praying to these mysterious statues, somehow be connected? Is there a conspiracy going on so grand in Cyberpunk that the entire future of the franchise could be dependent on it? It seems every important character is connected to this mystery somehow, and we may have some clues as to how when investigating the game's files for Mr. Blue Eyes. You see, his undershirt is actually referenced in the game files as man_average Q115_blackhand_D. The reason this is so interesting is because Morgan Blackhand is a main character from the original Cyberpunk tabletop lore, who took place in the Arasaka nuclear bombing with Johnny Silverhand decades ago. But in the game, we never meet him. Could Blackhand somehow be a part of this ultimate alien conspiracy, mind control takeover of the net that will result in the complete annihilation of the human race as we know it? Potentially a story for a future Cyberpunk game or DLC. Another quick addition to this overall conspiracy is how Nightcorp may be involved as well, and is likely the main antagonist in a future Cyberpunk sequel. Throughout the game, on multiple shards we can crack the security and discover that Nightcorp is using beaming tech on users' brains to install new personalities, and that they've also created a small and now becoming large drone army to work as docile helpers. We know from talking with the Voodoo Boys that the net is not as secure as it is being made out to be, and many rogue AI could potentially be taken advantage of to cause massive damage. And everything we can tell from Nightcorp is that they are trying to take advantage of this. So could Nightcorp be planning to win an all-out corpo war by controlling the minds of innocent civilians and using a supposedly docile drone army to overpower adversaries? We'll just have to wait and find out in future games. And that's everything to the iceberg. Well, except one last thing. Because you see, the real biggest conspiracy theory about Cyberpunk isn't something within the game itself. It's how such an extraordinary product like this, with so much depth and love put into it, could fail so hard. On one hand, it makes sense. We were lied to, and this game on release was a disaster the likes of which we rarely see. But that's just it. Is that really the case? You see, for many people, they never played Cyberpunk, or barely did at all, or are only now getting into it. And their impressions of the release of this game as a whole have been made from the hordes of commentators damning it upon its inception. But you see, I've always loved this game. I was hyped for it from the beginning. I watched every press release, absorbed every interview, and played the game on every single console and PC on release, and up until today. The story you have been told about this game is a complete lie. And funnily enough, the biggest conspiracy about Cyberpunk isn't some mystery in the game, but one outside of it. And how an entire industry was tricked into thinking one of the greatest games of all time was actually a flop. And how a game that was much better than people thought, even upon release, was dragged through the mud. But you see, extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, the kind that deserve its own video and own analysis. And so that's exactly what I plan on doing. And as always, thanks for watching.